Supah Ritz, Volume 2, Chapter 10, Parties, Premieres, and Celebrities. Okay, sure. The work is what sustains you. The thrill of operating in the crucible of high-pressure filmmaking, working with artists and craftspeople performing at the top of their game, the magic of creation under such high stakes that keeps bringing you back again and again for more. But let's be candid. The parties and premieres don't exactly suck. It's fun to see celebrities out in the wild, walking around like regular humans. We all long to peer behind the veil, to answer that age-old question first posed by Us Weekly. Are they really just like us? While Phoenix was, in a lot of ways, ground zero for celebrity encounters, I think if I'm totally honest, my many interactions with celebrities over the years probably told me more about myself and the people around me than they ever did about the stars themselves. One of the reasons Phoenix was such a celebrity juggernaut was that we had a constant flow of stars from our overalls with Sean Penn, Nick Nolte, and Gabriel Byrne. All three of them made regular appearances in the office, but they also each had their coteries of famous friends and collaborators who you might run into in the hallways and restrooms. There were also the projects we made that brought in the likes of Edward Norton and Courtney Love. And as a financier, agents sent their young stars like Heath Ledger, Hugh Jackman, and Angelina Jolie into our offices for general meetings. I met Jessica Biel on her way home from a soccer practice. Then, of course, there was Mike with his long career of A-list relationships. You never knew who you might bump into in the Phoenix elevator, though us regulars steered clear of it, after Norman Jewison, director of Heat of the Night, got trapped there while delivering his annual holiday gift of maple syrup and pistachio nuts. And you never knew who you might run into in the third-floor conference room as they waited for a sit-down with Mike. I remember one time I was interviewing interns there, surrounded by the Wall of Fame, framed photos of Mike posing with famous A-listers, an analog version of the Infinite Scroll, when one of Mike's assistants escorted in an impossibly adorable woman in her early 20s. She had short cropped hair and a radiant smile, and I quickly ended my interview so I could turn to her and flirt. She told me her agent had sent her in to see Mike. "Oh, so you're an actress?" I asked. "Yes," she nodded, shy and coquettish. I was smitten. "Have you been in anything I've ever seen?" I asked. "Well, I was just in a small Australian film called Muriel's Wedding." I don't think the film had actually come out yet, but I had actually seen it at the previous Sundance, which put me in some pretty rarefied, high-altitude, in-the-know ranks of film executives. I became, in this moment, impossibly suave. "I saw Muriel's Wedding," I growled. "I loved Muriel's Wedding. Who did you play?" She paused awkwardly. "Muriel?" She popped whatever romantic bubble I believed I was conjuring, and we both burst out laughing. I put my tail between my legs and skulked out to find another intern to interview, as Toni Collette, still laughing good-naturedly, hollered after me, "I look a lot different in the film!" One time Mike Medavoy called me up to his office. It didn't happen often, but I always relished the opportunity. I might shine, I might fail, but I love a high-stakes act, regardless. He was sitting in the living room side of his office space and was just wrapping up a meeting with a sophisticated young woman. They stood, and he told me, "She wants to work with us. Find her a desk and a phone and give her something to do." Oh, Jesus, I thought. This is a pain in my ass. We don't need any more young people with nothing to do around here. I don't have an extra desk or phone. Our interns are all sitting at the conference room table. What's more, as I escorted her into the third-floor conference room to confer with her out of Mike's earshot, I realized she didn't speak English. What the hell was I going to do with an intern who didn't speak English? "So what do you want to do?" I asked, thinking she might want to produce or direct or write or who knows. "Please," she stammered in halting English, her thick accent sounding Eastern European to me. "Call me a taxi?" Now wait a minute, I thought. This refugee from behind the Iron Curtain is just going to let this golden opportunity slip through her grasp? I can't let that happen. "But Mike wants to give you a job," I implored. What do you do? What are you into?" "I am an actress," she answered, her desperation growing a little more acute. "I am in the film Ridicule." And I realized in horror that I was in the midst of trying to hire Hollywood's hottest current ingenue, Judith Godreche, whose voluptuous chest was mesmerizing audiences all over America, into my internship program. I hustled her up a bottle of water, called her a cab, and I don't think Mike ever followed up to find out what happened. Of course, these were just funny brushes with celebrity, but working with famous people, getting to know them in the trenches, is another story. I did eventually come to have a handful of close working relationships with a few biggish names, and I was, almost without exception, impressed by the way they carried themselves and treated their fame with humility. They all acted as if they were just custodians of a power, guardians of a sacred fire they knew would eventually wane. But in those early years, when I was working with celebrities, I was just a gobsmacked pubescent boy, as starstruck as any civilian. I remember sitting in on a development meeting at Showtime with our New York exec Diane Sokolow on a book she was producing with Salma Hayek in The Time of the Butterflies. Salma was actually in the meeting and conducting a vigorous debate about some aspect of the script or production. As Salma made an impassioned plea on behalf of her point of view, I was amazed to see she was as passionate about the story as any craven development exec I'd ever met. I found myself marveling at the impossibility of her beauty. It was astounding, otherworldly. I must have been staring at her weirdly, scrutinizing the flawlessness of her skin, because she suddenly turned to me and was like, "You, what do you think? You sit here in this meeting. You must have an opinion." But I had stopped listening like 5 minutes before she called on me, and had possibly left my body altogether. I was, after all, in the presence of something divine, and honestly, I had never read the book anyway. I was a terrible exec. All I could do was stammer incoherently, as if all my backed-up adolescent jizz had just short-circuited my brain. And Salma blinked a couple times, nodded her disapproval, and moved on. It was one of maybe only 2 times in my entire life I found myself at a complete loss for words. Of course, you also sometimes ran into celebrities at parties. A celebrity at a normal party sends a weird energy through the place. It's not dissimilar from the energy you find when a group of guests are secretly sharing an 8-ball. They've got a secret they're excited about, but they're trying to keep their cool. A-list parties, on the other hand, are a different phenomenon. At an A-list party, everyone is a star, so the vibe is less desperate. Even if you are not a star, the celebrities talk to you like you must be someone important, because why else would you be there? I've only been to a handful of true A-list events in my lifetime, but they're pretty fun. The Oscars is perhaps the ultimate A-list party. Everyone is there. If you sneak out of the show during a commercial break, you'll find Matt Damon and George Clooney waiting at the bar with Tina Fey and Will Ferrell. It's surreal. Back in the day, before security became digitized, you could buy an Academy member's ticket and just use them yourself. One year, my wife and I bought Marcia Nasser's tickets and went to the show with 2 of Medavoy's assistants, Dan Butler and Will Taylor. Dan was an epic human whose hearty laugh felt like a shield against all of life's disappointments. He died way too young. The whole thing came together a bit last minute, though, so we found ourselves renting the last available limousine in all of Los Angeles to take us to the Shrine Auditorium, where the Oscars were hosted. The car, a late 70s stretch with mottled windows and faded Naugahyde trim, pulled up to our tiny house in Beechwood Canyon, and the 4 of us climbed in with nothing but a 12-pack of beer. What they don't tell you about the Oscars is that by the time you've navigated the traffic and the drop-off lane and finally arrived on the red carpet, you've already drank so much beer the only thing you can think about is how badly you have to pee. Still, I was struck by 3 things. First, the noise on the carpet is cacophonous. Those stars are doing some real acting as they conduct interviews and pretend that they are cool. Second, there's actually 2 red carpets, one for famous people, flanked by camera crews and fans, and one for everyone else. This should be obvious, but I was disappointed as a young lad that no one from E was going to step out and ask me what I was wearing. My third and final observation from my brief sojourn on the red carpet was Tom Cruise is half the height of Nicole Kidman, and it was downright weird seeing them together in real life. I'm happy to report I went straight to the men's room and took one of the most memorable leaks of my life. I was flanked at the urinal by Trey Parker and Matt Stone, who had both gone to the Oscars that year in drag and were gamely hiking up their gowns to pee at the same time on either side of me. My crew had nowhere to go after the Oscars. The real hot tickets, the Governor's Ball or the Vanity Fair party, were still way out of reach for us, so we did what a lot of famous winners do anyway. We drove to In-N-Out in our black ties and passed out later at home. Premieres, I suppose, are another form of A-list party, and I went to a ton of them back in the day. In practically my first week in Hollywood, Howard Baldwin invited me to the premiere of Philadelphia, a truly star-studded affair. I didn't realize then what a hard ticket it was to get. Most of the premieres back then had slammin' parties afterwards, and as an assistant at William Morris, we were thrilled when agents gave their tickets to their assistants and we got kissed into a free movie, followed by a crazy party with all the food and drink we could manage. For The Game, the David Fincher-directed mind puzzle starring Michael Douglas, Polygram built a whole version of the game itself at the Hollywood Athletic Club for the party after the screening. Boy, was it fun. But my favorite film premiere experience happened when I attended, as Eric Paquette's Plus One, the Westwood screening of Return to Paradise, the Joaquin Phoenix and Heche starring thriller. For the purposes of the larger narrative here, I suppose I should make clear that Eric had now graduated from Mike's desk and moved to my old office on the second floor. I had been relegated to a vestibule on the first floor that I shared with our company's accountant, Joy DiMartino. Joy was lovely and easygoing, but as I write this, I'm astounded I ever agreed to this slap in the face and wonder how I weathered it. I guess my star was really fading at this point, and my professional prospects dim. And I was thankful for the job. I must have figured I'd eat some shit till things improved. And don't worry, dear reader, they do. Besides, it was a small company. We were at a premium for space. Osborne had moved down to the first floor with his assistant, Trevor Engelson, and I guess I chose to stick with the devil I knew, than share a space with the unknown devil that was Paquette. Even if Eric's ascendancy was in direct contrast to, and perhaps the cause, of my own descent, who was I to turn down a premiere invite? I'll happily sacrifice my ego for a good dose of star fuckery. And as we approached the screening, the theater that night was ablaze in activity. Limousines and cameras, flashbulbs popping off like a firefight in Fallujah. Star fuckery was in full effect. Naturally, all that activity stops the second a civilian steps onto the red carpet, which in this case was a sickening shade of fading teal. It's profound, the indifference of the entertainment press to normies. But as Eric strode toward the theater a full step ahead of me, a woman in horn-rimmed glasses and a flowy dress stepped from the bank of entertainment press and pointed a microphone in my face. I stopped, all too eager to offer a few words, and her cameraman clicked on his interview spotlight. We are in the age before LEDs, and it blazed in my face. Delightedly, I was about to do my fantasy on-camera interview, the man on the street talking about what it feels like to be in the bigs. "Excuse me," the interviewer asked in a thick French accent. "Are you Anne Heche?" I assumed this to be some funny bit, and I peered up at the ceiling as I tried to quickly, deftly formulate a joke about my friendship with Ellen DeGeneres. But as the words started flowing, it was not a good joke, and I lowered my gaze to meet that of my interlocutor. I could see she was shrinking from me in a panicked terror, as her cameraman struggled to click off his spot and recede from my sight. Sorry, she mumbled, avoiding my gaze, and I realized in horror that she actually thought I might be Anne Heche. What gave me away? Am I bobbing Adam's apple when I started to speak? I turned down the carpet, wondering what it was about my outfit. I was wearing a weird green shirt, or my bearing, I have almost zero facial hair, that made them think I might be a woman. Anne Heche, no less. I caught up to Eric and tried to explain what just went down, but there aren't actually words to adequately describe the weirdness of the incident. After the screening, as I was leaving the theater that night, I was just a handful of people ahead of Anne Heche herself. She exits the theater in a scrum of well-wishers. She's an ethereal pixie fairy, half my height, a third my weight, wearing a full-length diaphanous ballet tutu with slippers. She is as much like me as I am like a silverback gorilla. Still, I'm haunted by this case of mistaken identity for years to come. But the real A-list parties happen at private homes, outside the glare of the paparazzi altogether. One of the more infamous ones I attended was hosted by Arnold Rifkin to celebrate William Morris's Oscar nominees. It was at Arnold Rifkin's house in the Palisades. Mary and I were included in Gus Van Sant's +1 when Gus invited his ex-boyfriend, a mutual friend, and said that he could also bring, quote-unquote, the usual suspects. We all believed Gus magnanimously intended to include his ex's new lover, but couldn't remember his name, so the usual suspects became a whole posse of his friends. The party was made up of William Morris agents, William Morris A-listers, studio chiefs, and us. As I had worked at William Morris, I knew a lot of the agents in attendance, who mostly came up to me and said, "Hey, what are you doing here?" Late in the evening, I was pretty fucked up, standing in Rifkin's entryway, and I kept leaning against the wall, inadvertently pressing the light switch and turning out all the lights in the front hall. Arnold Schwarzenegger was getting pretty incensed and kept barking in his classic Austrian accent, "Hey, who turned out the lights? Who turned out the lights?" Into this scene stepped Mike DeLuca, then head of New Line. I recognized him from the one time we'd met years ago at Dominic's when he and his team, Wick Godfrey and Donald Langley, chatted me up at the bar and pretended they were bank tellers. DeLuca was instantly flanked by two burly security men in matching tan suits. I thought they were his security and thought it was so odd that he'd gotten so famous that he now had to travel with muscle. What was happening with the world that it had come to this? It was only 48 hours later, when I read the trades Monday morning, that I learned the security was in fact Arnold Rifkin's, and the scene I had witnessed was DeLuca returning to the party after getting chucked out a half hour before for being on the receiving end of a blowjob in uncomfortable proximity to the buffet table. Isn't he running Warner Brothers right now? That guy is clearly a genius on many levels. But the best A-list party I attended at Phoenix was an annual event hosted by Mike Medavoy himself at Ron Burkle's palatial estate, Green Acres, in Beverly Hills. Every year on the eve of the Golden Globes, Mike would assemble an impressive cast of filmmakers and movie stars to sip drinks and eat canapes beneath the towering collection of Burkle's world-class art collection. Weirdly, I don't remember having that many great interactions at these things. Sure, Sean Connery was there, and Dennis Quaid, and Todd Solondz, and one of my colleagues almost pushed Minnie Driver down the stairs, so it's likely I was blackout drunk for a lot of them. But there was one incident near the end of my time at Phoenix that was pretty epic. This must have been in 1999. Bill Clinton had miraculously survived the Monica Lewinsky scandal while overseeing the largest economic peacetime expansion in American history. But the next administration was approaching. The country would be led either by the doltish George Bush or the wonky Al Gore. Both seemed terrible. While I had resisted Clinton's charms, the acid-washed jeans and too short running shorts, he seemed like a bastion of charisma compared to what lay ahead. I had, as of late, become Bubba's biggest fan. So you can imagine my drunken delight when rumors spread through the party that POTUS himself might make an appearance. He was in Los Angeles on a fundraising swing, and Mike had actually helped him launch his presidential bid 8 years before. What's more, it was Mike's birthday, and Burkle was also a close FOB. The rumor was soon substantiated by the sudden appearance of plainclothes security hauling sleek titanium cases. The Secret Service had arrived. I've never seen the uber-cool lose themselves quite the way they did when Clinton finally entered the place. Actually, that's not true. One time I'd witnessed every salesperson at Fred Siegel drop their facades of indifference and shriek like teenage girls when Leo DiCaprio appeared in the parking lot. It was a lot like that. Clinton made his way down Burkle's colonnade from the front door to the library, and the crowd surged in his direction as he tried to shake every hand along the way. My wife wasn't sure she wanted to battle the sharp elbows to get an audience with Bill, but there was no way I was missing this. I parked myself along his path and eagerly watched his progression. Every person along the way tried to impress the president with their own importance, to make some impression he might carry with him. Clinton, I know, has amazing recall, and does or did remember almost everyone he ever met, an incredible and necessary gift for a politician. Still, I felt the futility of the effort. How am I going to compete with the likes of Sean Connery or Yitzhak Rabin? When he got to me, I put my hand on his shoulder, much to the chagrin of the Secret Service. I was pretty drunk. I leaned in and told him, "I'm nobody. I'm just a big fan." He smiled with his classic aw shucks Bubba grin and said in his good old boy drawl, "What's your name?" "Nick Morton," I answered. He grinned. "It's good to meet you, Nick." And that was it. But I'll be damned if I'm going to let an opportunity for comedy slip through my fingers. So when I turned to see who was next to greet the prez, I saw it was none other than Phoenix Pictures exec Arnie Messer. I decided it was only good and right to make the intro myself. "Oh, look," I said to Clinton. "It's Arnie Messer, president of Phoenix Pictures. Arnie, this is Bill Clinton, president of the United States." I didn't stick around to see how my joke landed. But if you ask me, in my case, celebrities bring out my very best.